And I will be the moderator. Vena has been in the sex therapy field for over 3 decades. She started when she was 2. Vena currently is the Quad-S Western Region President. She's IPSA, the International Professional Surrogate Association's President and Senior Trainer. And she has trained most of the surrogate partners currently practicing in the United States.
So I'm going to talk about supervising surrogate partner therapy. And I'm supposed to say I have no financial relationships to disclose, which is true. I'm not getting paid for this or my work as IPSA president. I think in order to help us understand how you supervise surrogate partner therapy, we need to talk about what surrogate partner therapy is. And it starts with a client. It doesn't exist if there isn't a client. It exists for and because and in service to the client. Client contacts therapist, and if appropriate, the therapist refers the client to a surrogate partner, and they become a therapeutic triad, relating to each other for most of the therapy in dyads. Client continues to see their therapist talks to the surrogate, client and surrogate see each other, so that most of the interactions are dyadic, but the information is pooled in a way so that all members of the triad are informed and participatory, and without that, it's not surrogate partner therapy. It's something else. Some people might say they're working as a surrogate partner. If they're not working in this modality, it's not surrogate partner therapy. It starts with the client establishing a relationship with the therapist. And if they contact the surrogate partner, they're asking the surrogate partner, does this seem like an appropriate case for you, and are you interested and available? We'll talk a little more about how we identify who is an appropriate client and who might need this work. The initial meeting between client and surrogate partner happens in the therapist's office most of the time. There's a great value in having the therapist present and the meeting happening in the therapist's office. That's a familiar place for the client. It's a gentle stretch from what they've already done. And the therapist gets to observe the interaction between surrogate and client. And then even if the client doesn't go forward, there's tons of material available to the therapist to work with. If the client says, oh, that surrogate was so bossy and mean, the therapist has some sense of what interaction led the client to that interpretation. If the surrogate partner says, boy, that client seemed extremely anxious, the therapist has some baseline in their former experience with the client to be able to say this is how the client typically is, or the client went off the Richter scale when you walked in the room. I had that experience once where the therapist said, I was talking with the client about his medication before you walked in the room. He was telling me all about it, and when you walked in, he couldn't remember the name of it. So it happens. Most of the time, the client, if they go forward, they work with the surrogate partner in the surrogate partner's workspace. They continue to see the therapist and surrogate are consulting with each other over the phone. And there is the possibility and option for additional meetings between all 3 people to help resolve impasse difficulties, communication difficulties, or even to celebrate great successes. And then after the relationship with the surrogate closes, the client continues with the therapist. There are 4 primary functions and themes that run through all surrogate-client interactions. Everything is simultaneously diagnostic and skill building and a model for healthy future relationships and potentially transformative. And I'm going to say a little more about that, this part especially. In fact, I still like what I wrote. I'm going to quote myself. Effective surrogate partner therapy illuminates the client's physical and emotional patterns, skills, difficulties, as well as highlighting developmental issues, defensive and characterological structures, emerging transference and countertransference, client's responses to their own anxiety, to intimacy, to arousal, to anger, to successes and failures. All of that provide valuable information to the therapist and the surrogate partner and the client. Everything that happens is diagnostic. Everything that goes wrong is diagnostic. Everything that goes right, every potential growth, every increase in eye contact is diagnostic. We're identifying the client's areas of strength and their difficulties in the early stages so we can work on those so that by the time we get to the later stages of the work, they have grown and developed and have the ability to function at a higher level. Greater capacity for intimacy, greater capacity for relaxation and mindfulness, and it's this consistent, high-quality professional consultation between the therapist and the surrogate partner that allows us to, in our separate interactions with the clients, to be working on the same material, to identifying. The therapist typically has long history with the client. Sometimes the client's been with that therapist a decade or more when they finally decide to work with a surrogate partner, and so they have treasure trove of information about how the client has grown and changed and where their difficulties are, and even what their personal familial history is that they can then make available to the surrogate partner. Additionally, the interaction the surrogate's having often unveils information heretofore not made available to the therapist. The intimacy, the contact, the context of the relationship with the surrogate partner, equality, and just where the client has gotten to as a result of all the work they did with the therapist. Sometimes new material emerges. It's not uncommon for clients to reveal that they were molested to the surrogate partner and never have told their therapist about it. To reveal drug use, to reveal that they're buying Viagra from Canada, or to reveal that their dog died last week, that they didn't tell their therapist, and the surrogate partner can feed that information to the therapist, allowing the therapist to be more valuable and useful, and also to keep clearing the client's emotional space so they're available for the next piece of work with the surrogate partner. Just to be clear about some of the structure and ways that surrogate partner therapy happens. It has happened all around the world: Australia, Israel, the UK, the US, Canada. It can happen in two kinds, typically two settings: either a clinic setting where the therapist and surrogate are seeing the client on premises, or where they are collaborative private practitioners and the client is seeing the therapist in the therapist's office and seeing the surrogate in the surrogate's office or home. It can happen in a weekly format, which for some clients means every other week. For some clients it means a couple times a week, but it's typically a one-to-one therapist-surrogate session ratio, or 2-to-1, or in an intensive format, which is very valuable since there are very few surrogates in the entire world, and there are more clients who need this work in areas where the surrogates don't exist. So the client might travel to an area where the surrogate lives and works with the therapist, or the therapist and client might hire the surrogate to travel to the client's area and work intensively. And in the intensive format, you're seeing the client is seeing the surrogate typically around 3 hours a day, and the therapist an hour a day, every single day, generally 7 days a week. The therapist saying, "What? I never see clients." Sometimes they do it on the phone, but it's so valuable to keep the momentum going. And for clients who have traveled from around the world, it's very costly to stay in hotels or have the surrogate partner staying in hotels while they're away from their home area, and therefore useful to work as many days a week as possible. I'm going to go back to this later, but I want to start out by saying that surrogate partner therapy is more complex than most people imagine. A lot of people in this room have done the work in one capacity or another, as a supervising therapist or as a surrogate partner. But for those of you who haven't participated, it's helpful to know it's a gradual process. It has phases and stages, and the surrogate and therapist and client are together making decisions about how to advance the work and when it's time to move to the next phase. The first phase is a trust-building, safety establishing phase, and also initial skill building. We're talking relaxation skills, basic communication skills, and mindfulness, basic sensate focus like hand, foot, face caress. Not the sexy stuff people imagine the work is. Much deeper, much sexier in the heart-centered place than people imagine. The second phase of the work might involve nudity and whole body touching and dealing with body image issues. The third phase is where we might actually begin to address sexuality issues, what people think surrogate partner therapy is about, and is for some clients. Not every client makes it to the third phase of the work. Not every client needs that work. Some come into the work. One woman contracted for a short surrogate partner therapy intensive so she could learn how to hug and kiss. She was born and raised in a culture where that was forbidden. She had moved to the US. She was going to be continuing to live here. She wanted to be able to date, and she wanted to learn to be comfortable and overcome her religious upbringing and her anxieties. The sessions with surrogate partners, much like a session with a therapist, begin with a conversation. How are you? How's your week? How are you feeling? Taking each other's temperature. But then we're making a decision together about what we will do with the rest of the time we have, and most of that is spent in structured or non-structured experiential learning. And it's that makes the surrogate partner work so different from the traditional therapy work, because it's hands-on, it's mutual. If we're doing relaxation, I'm laying down and doing the relaxation as well. The surrogate partner is engaging in gentle, non-sexual touch exercises in the very beginning with the client, even teaching them about touching objects or touching their own hands. But eventually, it moves into some kind of hands-on work between client and surrogate partner, like 10 minutes of touching a right hand and then 10 minutes of touching the other person's right hand. There's some degree of talking about how the session went, and then talking about homework, and then each of them talking with the therapist before they meet again, so that the therapist is involved, included, and the client doing emotional processing of whatever issues came up. It's a gradual, systematic process, cognitive behavioral therapy 101, systematic desensitization, successive approximation. We're starting with very gentle, non-threatening exercises, building skills, and then eventually moving towards things that would have been frightening in the beginning for clients, or challenging, but aren't in the later stages of the work. That includes not just touching, but expressing emotions, asking for what you want, setting boundaries, saying no. The clients that we work with who have been molested as children, one of the primary skills they need to develop from the beginning of the work is how to know how they feel and what they want and what they don't want, and how to ask for what they want and how to say no to the things they don't want. I worked with one client where I was the surrogate partner. I worked with him for 3.5 years, which was about half as long as he was molested as a child. And we worked together for 1.5 years before a stitch of clothing came off. And about 3 months were spent with him trying to say the words, "I want." And what he wanted was for me to put my hands on his shoulders. It wasn't take our clothes off, it wasn't genital touching, it was, can I be allowed to want what I want in a relationship with another person, much less a woman, and a potential intimate relationship. And that potential serves as pressure and threat to help draw up the client's issues so we can help them work on them. Features of surrogate client interactions. I'm not going to go over this whole list. You don't need to know all of them, but it's important to understand, if you're going to supervise the work, what's typical for surrogates and clients to do, because you're going to be participating in the decision about what this client needs at this stage in this session.
Clients are learning many things, including how to listen to their own bodies and how to listen to the communication that comes from the touch of another person. They're ultimately given the opportunity to explore their whole body with the surrogate partner. Not every client needs that. It's not appropriate for every client. We are also exploring the whole realm of intimacy and contact and connection, and how you feel matters to your desire to be in the room and to be touched and to touch. It's not about mechanically going through a process. So let's talk about the role of the supervising therapist. It's the therapist's job to assess the client's appropriateness and readiness for the work. The therapist is the portal, the gatekeeper for the work. We don't prefer to market the work to the public. What we want is for therapists to be doing the assessment and making a referral to the surrogate partner when the client is really ready. It's the therapist's job to help educate the client about what the work is and what it isn't, and prepare them for the initial meeting. I've had therapists talk to me about wanting to make a referral, and it's a year later before the client is actually ready. I made a referral to Hani across the country, and she took months working with the client to help determine whether or not the client was in fact ready and appropriate to do the work. When I make a referral, when the Surrogates Association refers a client to a therapist, it is not on the assumption that the client is going to be referred for surrogate partner therapy. It's for assessment. It's your job to also get consent from the client to expand the agreement for confidentiality to include the surrogate partner. Just like you would if you were working with a physician supervising, or rather consulting with a physician on a case. You get the release of confidentiality. That's important. You want to set up the initial meeting after having selected an ethical and well-trained surrogate partner. We're going to talk about some of these as we go. You're also going to help the client, as a therapist, you can help the client to process the experience, nurture the relationship between the surrogate and client, and foster the client's long-term well-being. And sometimes that means suggesting things that are in the moment uncomfortable for the client, or even uncomfortable for the surrogate. Suggesting, by the way. Therapists are not puppeteers telling people what to do with their bodies and their hearts, but suggesting this might be a useful piece of learning. It's the therapist's job to help interpret the client's defensive reactions, to help the surrogate understand, because surrogates get so close with the client, it can be hard to tell what's my shit and what's yours. Oops, probably not supposed to say that anymore. Okay, but nonetheless, that's the truth. It can be difficult to tell. Is this me? Is this you? When you're that close, that's why you have the triad. That's why surrogates should not be working without a supervising therapist, because we have gone outside those boundaries and we need this outside person maintaining some kind of objective overview to help us look out for the client's long-term well-being and to help tease apart what the issues are that are coming up. And so I had one client, I felt terrible. I was falling asleep during sessions, and I felt guilty. I was digging my fingernails into my palms. I was sitting on my hands so I couldn't tip forward. And I finally confessed to the therapist, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I'm just falling asleep during sessions. And he said, oh my God, you too? That was valuable information, because then we got to know something new and different about this client as a result of our collaboration. There was another case where I agreed to work with a female client. I used to be bisexual. I haven't been with a woman in a long time, but I loved a woman once, so I'm pretty sure I can do it. But there was no other female surrogate in town. The therapist loved me, trusted me, said, you can do it. This client was a lesbian, identified female who'd never been in a relationship with anyone. The therapist is in the room and is smiling. And she'd never been with a partner because no one would agree to go on dates with her or partner with her. They said, we want to be friends with you, but nothing else. We're in the middle of the work, and I called the therapist, quite upset, apologizing that I shouldn't have taken the case because I obviously am no longer bisexual. I can't feel anything erotic with this woman. This part of the work, we did the hand caress, we did body image work, we even danced together. I tried, getting into my inner butch to see if that could work. I was just trying to pull something out of myself to make it work, and I apologized. And the therapist said, Vena, don't you remember? That's this woman's issue. This is how everyone, and I'm like, all right. Because I was a little insecure, I went into it with a vulnerability I wouldn't necessarily have. And the therapist helped me tease apart. Was it me? Was it her? Could have been me. It just didn't happen to be in this case. Turned out to be a really, really great case. A really great case. I'll skip to the end and tell you that at some point, client took a break. We came back, met in the therapist's office for an additional three-way meeting. The client said, I've decided the way to solve my problem is to work intensively with you. And I said, I don't think I can do that. I think it would be unethical of me to agree to take more money and more time when I don't actually know how to solve the problem. And she started to cry, and she said, I've done everything you guys told me to do, even when I had no idea what you were talking about. I've been pretending to be a grown-up when I feel a child, like I'm a child, and I just don't know what else you want from me. And we both went, you're pretending to be a grown-up? So we made a contract for authenticity. The second it didn't feel authentic to her, she was to stop the process. And when she could be authentically herself again, in the moment, in the room, then we would start touching again. And in that, she found her way to her own authentic arousal and authentic emotional connection with me. And then the work was done. And then she grew up and flew the nest. I just want to say a couple words about what is supervision. Supervision is support, but in a clinical way. It's not, there, you're doing a good job. I mean, yes, we want to hear that. But that's not enough. We want, what do you think about the client? What do you think about the case? What's your clinical reason? Give me your brain, not just your emotional support. I want that too, but that's not enough. And it's not doing therapy with the surrogate partner when you're helping to identify the surrogate's issues. If the surrogate has issues, she'll go to her therapist or her support system to work on those, but it can be very helpful if you're willing to invite the surrogate to be more vulnerable and reveal those issues. I had one moment where I was feeling, frankly, in love with the client and quite concerned. It made me dizzy and foolish and not particularly smart on the case, because when you're in love, you don't actually want the person to change, but this person has shown up for change. So I was on the phone with a trusted therapist saying, help me figure this out. What's going on with me? What's going on in my life that I'm vulnerable to this? What's this about going on with the client, and how am I going to work this and maintain appropriate boundaries? When the therapist and surrogate have a really tight relationship, you can weather great difficulties. I called one therapist and said, I have an awkward thing to bring up to you. Your client is telling me that he's concerned about your behavior. He thinks you're masturbating in session. And you can imagine how frightening that is for a therapist to hear. But I trusted this therapist, and I said, let me tell you what he's describing, and you tell me what you think's going on. I said, the client says your eyes are rolling up in the back of your head, and your body is shaking, and then you're sort of jumping around in the chair. And he said, I'm falling asleep. I said, that's what I thought. So, we don't want to admit that either. That's not a good thing either. But I don't think they take away our license for that. So we have to trust each other a lot. Clients can be quite disturbed. We all know that. And certain clients aren't appropriate to work with surrogate partners. Let's talk about who is. They have to be adults. And they generally are adults without partners. We'll talk about why that is a tiny bit. But if they have a partner, they should work with their partner. Grow their relationship. Make it better, more powerful. Let their partner participate in knowing them and becoming a better intimate partner with them. It can be every sexual orientation and gender of all the various kinds. Might often is a client who experienced abuse, neglect in childhood, not just sexual abuse, sometimes physical abuse, making trust of others so profoundly difficult that they find it difficult to create intimate relationships. By the way, I'm willing to send this PowerPoint to anybody who writes to me, and I have my cards up here, so you can take pictures if you want, but if you want the PowerPoint, take the card and write to me, and I'll send it. Makes it easier for you. And then I get to say hi. Clients, a lot of our clients have social disability, or they're midlife virgins with social anxiety and Asperger's. I'd say 50% of our clients are midlife virgins, male and female. Clients with body image issues, some of it's just, I don't like my penis size, or I'm worried about my big belly or something, but some of it's full-blown body dysmorphic disorder. Some of it has to do with disfigurement. There was one client who had a botched circumcision, another who had a chemistry accident in the garage and was missing a phallus, and we have clients with post-mastectomy, post-surgery, people afraid to re-engage after heart attacks, and they need a safe place, or after prostate surgery. Anybody who's inhibited, anxious, averse, avoidant of sexuality is likely to have gotten themselves in a position where they don't have that partner, and they can't create the relationship that will help them build the skills in order to be able to have the future relationships. It's common that they're inexperienced, but not just inexperienced, they have shame, embarrassment, low self-confidence, they're unwilling to ask people to date them, they're afraid of how they will be perceived. Whatever was the reason for the lack of experience, now it's the shame about the lack of experience that is inhibiting them from moving forward. And we're talking 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old virgins, both male and female. All the typical sexual dysfunctions can be worked on in surrogate partner therapy in the traditional ways. Only the surrogate partner is the partner doing the sexuality exercises. But you have to build a relationship so you have a context in which that sexual touch makes sense. I'm not a big fan of desire disorders. I don't know anybody who really is, because we don't know a lot about people who just have zero desire. I once did a presentation on what I call the erotically challenged clients who had no desire. I later came to realize a lot of them were Asperger's clients. But the category didn't exist. I guess it doesn't exist anymore. How stupid is that? That was very helpful to me that it existed for a short time, helped explain a whole bunch of my difficult cases, and why they didn't like anything that was normal, why our methodology didn't work, and it isn't appropriate for every client. So let's talk about who isn't. How about this? Psychotic. Not appropriate. I was referred a client, literally glassy-eyed and drooling, so over-medicated. I was also referred a client who had paranoid delusions. The therapist said, no, he's not full-blown paranoid schizophrenic, he's just a paranoid personality. I said, he told me that people are sneaking into his room at night, lubing up his ass with Vaseline and trying to give him AIDS. What do you think? Please do not refer your sociopaths to surrogate partners. The one client that I actually refused to work with, I'm sitting in the initial therapy session with the therapist, and something seemed odd, but I couldn't quite figure it out. In the first session with me in my office, I got it. I don't know, they say there's a name for the reaction. I didn't know about it, but I just knew that he was a sociopath and dangerous. And I called the therapist, who, by the way, always administered an MMPI to his clients. Who does that? But he did. And I left a message and said, I really, really need to talk to you. He called me immediately, and I said, I'm wondering if you administered the MMPI to this client like you usually do. And he said, yeah, I did. I said, I'm surprised it didn't show any sociopathy. And he said, it did. Even if he wasn't going to be dangerous, once I was afraid, it wasn't going to work. Low functioning borderlines, this is challenging work. The boundaries are very different. With the low functioning borderline, it's too chaos inducing. They need to be more stable. And that's true for people who are in drug and alcohol addiction or too newly in recovery. They need to be more stable. Otherwise, the work destabilizes and they reach for the old familiar ways of stabilizing, and that's not good for them. So if they have an available spouse, they should work with their spouse. That said, sometimes the spouse says, I refuse to work with you on this issue. The surrogates in the room, there's therapists in the room. You ever, raise your hands, how many have worked with a client where the spouse says, I refuse to come into therapy? Yeah, like almost everybody. So, the other, this is not, I mean, it's therapy. It's hard work. It's costly. It's time. And we're all working our hearts out. So if somebody's just looking for a good time, they can get that much more cheaply and, frankly, have a lot more fun someplace else. So it's the therapist's job to select an appropriate, well-trained, ethical surrogate partner. In my opinion, these are the qualities that make a really good surrogate. They have good training and they are intelligent. They're bringing a good mind into the process and great character and compassion and the ability to be present, nurturing, loving with all kinds of people. Because our clients are clients for a reason and they are not the easiest people to get close to. They have ways of pushing the world away, otherwise the world would have gotten close and they wouldn't need us. And so we have to be able to tolerate that push, and the therapist needs to be able to help us understand it when it's too much for us, so we can go back to the place of compassion. The surrogate needs to be non-defensive and willing to work on her own issues. It's really helpful if the therapist is too, by the way. Just saying. For me, that means I work with IPSA certified surrogate partners because they've been screened both through the training process and through an internship process, and I'm just not comfortable going outside of that. It takes too long to find surrogate partner out, and do the screening, and the client who helped me screen them might be sacrificed in the process. So the IPSA certification process requires not only 100 hours of classwork and a bunch of reading and writing and sort of character evaluation, but in supervised internship, the surrogate partner intern works with generally a number of cases, supervised not only by the client's therapist, but by an experienced surrogate partner. Sometimes they choose different surrogate partners so they can learn from many, and they're processing every single session with both the therapist and the mentor. It is common for surrogates, actually interns, to take the money from their first case, because they're getting paid on those first cases, and go straight into therapy. Because it stirs up so much of your stuff. Thank God I did the work for decades, because I got to a place where I'd actually processed a lot of those issues. There's tons to know about surrogate work. You're going to supervise it. Learn what surrogate therapy is. Many therapists have come and done the training through IPSA in order to better understand. It's fun. You get to do a lot of hands-on work, and you really understand the work. It makes you a better therapist to the couples you work with because you've done the exercises. It's sensate focus-based. It's intimacy-focused training, so you partner with one person from beginning to end to learn what it's like to start a relationship from scratch and get as intimate as you can. And nobody's ever required in the training or in therapy, no one is ever required to do anything that's not personally okay with them. Not client, not surrogate, not therapist, not trainee. Just a word about the International Professional Surrogates Association. It's now 40 years old. What? Something like that? No, that can't be right. 30? 41? Good Lord. Oh, yeah, that is right. Give me a second. Okay. I didn't found the organization. I joined the organization, became the trainer, and eventually their senior trainer and president presently. They offer a lot of things. They have a code of ethics. Surrogates who are certified have made a commitment to honor the IPSA code of ethics. We're just about to start a revision of the code of ethics, making it actually more stringent, and it's constantly being revised. There's actually an ethics committee that reviews ethics complaints. It doesn't happen very often, but last year we got several complaints about one surrogate partner, and because there is no licensing of surrogate partners, the organization attempts to do some self-monitoring for the profession. The IPSA website has lots of information. If you're considering working with surrogate partners, I recommend you read the information there. It's text heavy, not a sexy picture on the site. Unless you find flowers and grass sexy. Some people do the whole eco-sex thing, I guess. Anyway, the Surrogates Association will refer clients to therapists who want to receive referrals and have joined the organization, and they will refer therapists to certified surrogate partners. They don't refer clients to surrogate partners because clients need to be working with therapists first. Sometimes somebody calls themselves a surrogate and they aren't. They like the title because it has some legitimacy, those 40 years, etc. But they're really, training is something different. They have a different set of skills, and I'm not judging the different set of skills. I just want to be clear that it's not the same training and they're not offering the same treatment process. So some of the sexological body work, for instance, is one-way touch. The body worker touches the client who's on a table. It's not two-way touch, and it's not relationship-centered in the same way. The sacred intimate, it might be two-way touch, and it might be relationship-focused, but you're not having the supervising therapist, and it's not necessarily therapy-based, although it might be with the intention of doing something therapeutic. You know, there are lots of alternative ways for people to do experiential learning with friends, with spouses, with lovers. Helen Singer Kaplan, in her book on treating premature ejaculation, says, a guy would be a skunk. That was her word. If he just picked up a girl in order to get her to practice the start exercises with him. So sometimes they get referred to a surrogate partner for that. Let's talk about the myths, misunderstandings about surrogate, not all of them, but a few of them. One myth is that there is no research on the subject. Another myth is that it's all about sex. And another myth is that it is illegal and unethical. You've heard that. You probably, maybe even said that to someone. Pretty sure it's illegal, it's unethical. The research. Number one, most of surrogate partner therapy is made up of the same stuff that standard sex therapy is made up of, and benefits from all the research that's been done on all the cognitive behavioral treatment. Everything from the body image research, the sex education research, the mindfulness research, sensate focus research, anything used in any other methodology that is sex therapy based has relevance for surrogate partner therapy. But the first research about surrogate partner therapy was done by Masters and Johnson. They worked with couples, and they developed a really effective treatment method, except there were a few people who didn't have partners, who were not coupled. Yes, even back in the 50s and 60s, people who were not married had sex and developed sexual difficulties, and they wanted treatment. They wanted to access this incredibly effective treatment, and Virginia Johnson and Bill Masters came up with the idea of having them work with a partner surrogate. 11 pages of their book, Human Sexual Inadequacy, talks about the work of clients with partner surrogates, and their conclusion was that treatment with partner surrogates was as effective or more effective than treatment of clients with personal partners. There's your first piece of research. The same research that all the rest of sex therapy was based on. They used the same methodologies, they substituted partners, wives and husbands, no, excuse me, wives. They did not make male surrogate partners available to female clients. Bill Masters was a little conservative, and he thought females would not be able to trust and open up sexually to a man they'd only known 2 weeks. Some of the other investigators, Martin Cole in the UK, he was doing research the same time as Masters and Johnson, and published back then. Bernie Zilbergeld did some of his own research with some of his own clients. His conclusion was that this was the best treatment for men with sexual problems who had no sexual partner. You see it, even he published it in The New Male Sexuality. Some of the other authors, Bernie Applebaum, Barbara Roberts, David Johnston, Rex Reese, Linda Savage, who many of you know, Ray Noonan. Ray Noonan in 1982 did a master's thesis, asked surrogates, what percentage of your work involves a whole variety of activities? His conclusion, 2% of the work, according to surrogate self-report, 2% of the work was explicitly sexual. Frank Summers in Canada published a bunch, not a bunch, everybody published 3, 4, 5 papers. The most recent research has been out of Israel. Redi Alani and her colleague, whose last name is Ben Zion, published a recent study about comparing treatment of women with vaginismus working with husbands and women with vaginismus working with surrogate partners. A couple of interesting findings. The couples who were married dropped out more than the clients who were working with surrogate partners, and that the treatment was more effective with the surrogate partners, or close to as effective, but slightly more effective working with a surrogate partner than with a personal spouse. It's not true there is no research. As far as we know, there are no laws prohibiting surrogate partner therapy. There are lots of opinions about what surrogate partner therapy is and whether or not it's legal and illegal and ethical and unethical. And I've been paying attention for a super long time. I'm a little bit aware of Massachusetts, and people say that they believe it's illegal in Texas, although no one can come up with any evidence for that. What I know is people will tell you it's illegal even in California. I'm absolutely certain that it is not. I've spoken with legislators, I've spoken with district attorneys, I know people who are licensed in several different kinds of licenses where the licensing board had occasion to look at cases where the client had been referred to a surrogate partner. The therapist was exonerated on all counts. In California, if a client files a complaint about anything, the licensing board looks at everything to do with that case. What kind of records you kept, every single thing you did. And in 3 specific cases where clients filed a complaint because they were mad at their therapist, the therapist was exonerated, and it was clear that they had made referrals to the surrogate partner, and actually the notes from surrogate partner were part of the therapist's defense. So what we all have to do when we are making the determination of referring someone to anything is to ask, what is the best treatment for this client? And what other options are available for this client? Is there a book instead of an expensive workshop? What is the best way to help this client? Are those other options equally good? And I think we have to ask, would it be ethically responsible to withhold treatment that we know will be helpful from a client if there is no other equally good treatment available? Masters and Johnson said, and David Schnarch came along and echoed the idea that the relationship is the vehicle for change. It's an effective, perfect vehicle for changing your intimate, emotional, sexual relationship issues. But what if the client doesn't have a relationship? And yet that's the treatment of choice. So let's talk about challenges for supervising therapists. You gotta manage your own feelings. And sometimes those are difficult feelings. You've had the client all to yourself, and now you're letting your client love somebody else. Just like if you were letting them have another girlfriend or boyfriend, or your child go off and date somebody, or ride in somebody's car, or spend the night someplace else. You have your own feelings you have to manage. I can tell you, I worked as a surrogate partner, I work as a therapist supervising. There's feelings you have as a therapist you don't have as a surrogate. And some of it's about being left out, sharing the client. You have to work to avoid the triangulation and the collusions that can happen whenever you have three people in a relationship. The client says to you, don't tell my surrogate that I have a problem with her breath. Right? You say, so what you do, you don't tell the surrogate that the client has a problem with her breath. You help the client learn how to talk to his partner about, I want to be close to you and your strong breath is getting in the way. And what can we do about that together? We have to manage the changes and constantly changing transference and countertransference. We have our feelings, the surrogate has feelings, the client has feelings, and there's sometimes about the real relationships. I love that the analysts now have discovered that there's actually a real relationship in the room between client and clinician. I always knew that as a surrogate partner. Deciding when to ask, what to ask, and what not to ask, or where to direct the client's attention. We're curious. Are they having erections with the surrogate? But it's not always helpful to be focusing on that question because that's placing the emphasis perhaps in the wrong place. Just like you are placing your attention when you're working with a couple on what you're going to ask and pay attention to. You can often ask the surrogate partner all those questions that you have determined are not ideal to ask the client at this time. I say here, and it's true, that the therapist's attitude can make or break the case. And by that I mean the therapist's attitude about the surrogate-client relationship. If you view the surrogate as a tool, as a device to be used, the client is likely to view the surrogate partner in the same way. Ideally, the therapist and client have a really solid therapeutic connection so that they can weather difficulties that emerge. And the therapist and the surrogate partner value each other's perspective, like the blind men and the elephant. Sometimes we're just not seeing the whole picture and we can understand this client better by our shared point of view. Honoring each other's contributions to the client's well-being because they are different. And hopefully the client is a participant, an equal, respected participant in the decision-making. That this isn't a process done to the client, but with the client. Eventually directing their own learning and then leaving the surrogate partner and even the therapist blinding. It's our job to prioritize the client's well-being, both therapist and surrogate. It's the surrogate's responsibility to seek professional consultation, and if they're not getting it from you, they're going to have to go elsewhere. And then you've got another person, outside person, participating in the case. But if you're, and then sometimes therapists will just dump the case on the surrogate partner and not participate. They don't, I guess, respect their own contribution. Therapists and surrogate need to make a clear contract with each other, and that includes who's responsible for what, who's going to make the phone calls. I say like everybody. Are we going to be co-therapists or is one subordinate to the other? Who's going to be running the case? We don't want to talk about that. Make sure that the therapist and surrogate are compatible because this is often the weak link. We don't see each other as often. We don't talk to each other as long. The intimacy is not as great. And so the therapist and surrogate need to make sure they have solidified their relationship in the beginning and that they clear it occasionally in the middle of the process. Therapists should be making sure the client has all the information they need about the limits and the values and the content of surrogate partner therapy. But that might happen in that initial three-way meeting where the surrogate is actually describing it, but the therapist is present to make sure that the client is consenting. I can't tell you how many clients say that the reason they're going forward with surrogate partner therapy is because my therapist wants me to. That's not... I'm not going to stop here for very long, it's in the PowerPoint, but let me just say that there is value to intimacy in the developmental, maturational process, and when you haven't had it in your life, either because your family was defective or you took yourself out of the game too early, clients can come and relearn, have remedial intimacy training in surrogate partner therapy. The truth is they can have it in all therapy. Not all therapists are comfortable engaging their clients in that way. The attachment between surrogate and client is really important. And it happens at many levels. It's the authenticity in the room. It's the genuineness of the persons, and it serves as diagnostic. How does the client relate to this? Can they see the surrogate as a person? It's skill building. They're invited constantly to be more authentic. The surrogate is modeling a way of being in a relationship, and if the client rises to the occasion, then they are transformed. It's also the attachment that continues outside the room. This makes people nervous. What if the client falls in love, gets attached? What if their heart breaks? As soon as people get that real feelings happen, they start to be nervous. And that means somebody could get hurt. And you know what? It's true. Sometimes our hearts break when we say goodbye. They do. We also have joy, elation, anger, a bunch of other feelings, real feelings, with the intention to get as close as possible and to learn from the obstacles to closeness and to work through those obstacles. And the therapist sometimes is the one who can help the client work through the resistance so that they can show up and be more available. I'm going to go through this so fast. No, hey, I'm going to skip to the pictures. The first phase of the work. Look at all that sex. Second phase of the work. Tons of sex. Holding, touching, caressing, eye contact. Body image work. Third phase of the work includes coming to terms with our genital image and learning about safe sex and also sometimes being sexual. At this point, the client has learned to breathe, relax, communicate feelings, be emotionally intimate, talk about what they want, set their own boundaries. They are an equal. We have worked to the point where they are peers, the surrogate and client. So that the explicit sexual phase of the work, although the surrogate knows some stuff about sex therapy, their emotional relationship is one of intimate friends. Working on sexual issues is just like working on sexual issues in any sex therapy. The stop-start process, the getting and letting go of erections to come to terms with the fact that they go away and come back so that you get over that panic we have. When it goes away, oh my God, it'll never come back. Oh, there, my orgasm. Right? And so the surrogate gets to maintain it. Oh, it's okay, I'll come back. Right now, I'm giving a client gold stars for every erection he loses. I don't actually own gold stars, and I don't give them, but just the concept has turned out to be really helpful. We're also giving permission and validating eroticism, joy, pleasure. That client who was molested for 6 years as a young boy, the last phase of his work, when the therapist and I thought it was all done, he said, I'm not done. I've done everything, I've done all the behaviors, I know how to say no, but I have not fully embraced my male sexual energy. And I want to be a man. And know that being a man and being turned on and taking what I want doesn't hurt my partner. Can we just play? And then there's the last phase of the work, which is our closure. We say goodbye, we celebrate, we learn how to ask for what we want, notice where we started and where we ended up and where the bumps were. I ask for feedback. I say, what didn't you like? Remember that fight we had about blah, blah, blah. Celebrating as if we will never speak again, never see each other. In fact, preparing for the closures we will all eventually do with our loved ones. Because all relationships end. Divorce, death, change, it happens. We're going to teach them how to do this part too. And they continue with their therapist to help them process those feelings that they have after such a profound relationship and a profound goodbye. And I cannot believe I ended on time. Thank you all.